Thank you. I will take your advice to heart. One of the depressing features I find from a conversation, the sort of conversation we've had today, is the lack of reference to the views of our voters. This has been about politicians and political parties, for politicians and political parties. And I know you wouldn't mind me saying this, but it's not often I regret not being in the same room as the former Secretary of State for Wales. But on this occasion, I wanted to just raise, to follow up a point I made earlier on about the election result, because that, of course, was the last opportunity anybody had to express a view about the various offers on the table. And he said very kindly that bad election results had a number of reasons behind them, but that failed to articulate a single one. And what I wanted to put to him was quite simply this. Back in May, we had a situation in Wales where, and I will quote here from my favourite local newspaper, the Carmarthen Journal, it says here, in a move seen as rolling out the big guns, their words not mine, the Cabinet Minister strolled through Llanelli and Carmarthen town centres, warning against letting David Cameron seize control. I quote, I believe as people face up to the choice for the country, do they want a Tory government back in power or a Labour government taking Carmarthenshire forward? Then I think they will come back to Labour. Well, one opportunity I had was to thank, in a sense, the former Secretary of State for his help. We then managed to achieve a slightly above average swing from Labour to the Conservatives in Carmarthenshire, and that is with 39% of our electorate as public sector workers. But more importantly, I want to make this point. When you consult, whether it's a private citizen, whether it's a small business, a medium business, or a large business in West Wales, these are the expressions, and I'm quoting their words, not mine, which come up time and time again. And honourable members and right honourable members from all sides may have similar experiences. But the expression exasperation comes to mind. Let down by Labour. Please sort out the mess. These are expressions which were put to us before and since the election, by people who had no particular active right. And the reasons, just one minute, given the orders of the chairman. And the reasons given were this. The Honourable Right Honourable Gentleman, former Secretary of State in the front bench, mentioned banks. Yes, of course, banks and lending policy forms a major part of this. The lack of regulation over 30 years exasperated small and medium-sized businesses in my area. The approach to increasing, overwhelming and strangling red tape and regulation was something which completely confused and in some cases frustrated the progress of small and medium businesses in my area. And yet, over 13 years, the party opposite could only ever approach those kind of problems with two answers, either create a new law or to write a cheque. Now, neither of those two solutions worked when it came to the deregulation of business in my area. So I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I just want to say to the honourable gentleman, just 26 elected members out of 40. Not just give him a little bit of recognition that there was some support for the Labour Party at the election.
Simon Hart.
I'm not denying for one moment that in certain very solid areas not much change, but the shift was significant, and let's not forget we're talking about 35.5% of the vote to deliver that number of people. And of course the constitutional reforms our friends downstairs are currently debating actually will remove the inherent...
Order. Will the honourable member take a seat? Will he get back from the election to the comprehensive spending review?
Indeed, Mr. And I do apologise. I got so carried away by the honourable gentleman's intervention, I forgot what I was trying to argue. Not for the first time. Not for the first time. I want to go back to the exasperation of small and medium businesses in West Wales. I also want to touch on the exasperation of ordinary voters who had possibly supported his party over so many years, who actually were driven, much against their better judgments in some respects, to actually desert the party of their choice because of the sheer lack of progress which had been made in important areas such as education and health over a long period of time. Before I do give way to my honourable friend, I would say to most of the voters in Carmarthen, West and South Pembrokeshire, it is no good at all simply trying to turn around and say, well, some of these things are devolved, some of them aren't, some might be a little bit devolved out there. As far as they're concerned, they just want good government, they want honest government, they want transparent government, and they don't really care where it comes from. I'll give way to
Alan Kay.
Thank you, Mr. Mr Owen. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. And maybe I can share some helpful figures, because at the last election, the Labour Party gained 531,601 votes against 677,000 votes from
Order. Let's stick to the comprehensive spending review. Mr Hart.
Thank you.
It's not a debate. You wouldn't give us a debate.
Some good stuff, though.
Thank you. The most frustrating thing of all, Mr Owen, is the absolute failure of the former government to accept any kind of responsibility for anything that went wrong. And I have to say, listening this morning, I just felt like I'd arrived on a different planet, as if the last 13 years had never happened at all. And I can't honestly believe, and nobody's yet persuaded me, nobody's persuaded me, that somehow the last government was a shining example of competence and honesty. It simply wasn't, and the result in May surely reflected that. People lost faith and trust, and if I may say, and I know I'll give way, and they lost faith and trust in exactly the same way as they lost faith and trust in the Conservative government in 1997. I give way.
The right honourable gentleman speaking. When is the honourable gentleman going to mention the comprehensive spending review? I'm tired of this analysis of the election. I want to hear what he thinks about what his government is doing to the communities in Wales.
Thank the honourable member for his intervention. Like a good racehorse, he's a few lengths ahead, but I will be catching up, I can assure you. The fact is that most people, whether they are citizens, whether they are old, whether they are young, whether they are wealthy, whether they are not, recognise the grim reality of the situation. There is no denial out there in the real world. Outside the political bubble, people realise that serious things need to be done to address a serious situation. And the fact that somehow we have redacted, to use a sort of recently created expression, the last 13 years seems to me to lie at the heart of people's mistrust in politics. And I wanted to finish by dealing with the CSR and why people have confidence in what the coalition is doing, even though they recognise that that comes with a certain amount of pain. Like all good doctors, sometimes the advice and the surgery has to be a little bit painful, and in this case, nothing is different. But let me just quote a few things from my little patch of West Wales. Forget the big political message, forget the spin, forget all the parliamentary announcements. Let's just drill down to Carmarthen, West and South Pembrokeshire, and hear what people have to say there. My two local councils, Carmarthen County Council, Pembrokeshire County Council, both recognise that they've got a better than expected settlement and that they recognise it will be tough, but it is deliverable. They are not expecting meltdown in West Wales. I see the nods from the member for Carmarthen East and Dunebba. They can do this. Dyfed Powys Police recognise that they're in for a tough time, that policing will not be the same as it has been in the past, but they can do it. They can genuinely look after the interests of the community, given the settlement that is on offer. Local businessmen, important industries like tourism, agriculture, energy production, scattered around my constituency, employing anything from 2 to 200 people, recognise that the measures in place are essential and will actually deliver proper long-term growth and prosperity, which will, I hope, absorb any possible job losses in the private sector. Everybody understands that this has to be done, it seems, apart from the opposition, to restore growth in our economy in Wales. That is why they recognise that the comprehensive spending review, if I can get the words out, absolutely acknowledges the problems that other members have discussed, but also recognises that infrastructure, whether that's broadband, whether it's road, whether it's rail, has been mentioned opposite, and I spoke to an honourable member who had sat in this place many, many years ago, who was bemoaning the closure of the sleeper, which used to run from Paddington to Haverfordwest. Those were the days. He used to have finished his dinner by the time he got to Reading. But things have come on a little way since then. Decentralisation and deregulation are also key aspects which are covered in the comprehensive spending review and which should be welcomed. Now, I will finish with one quick reference to my good friend Mr John Starzewski, who runs a company called Magstim in Whitland, right on the Pembrokeshire-Carmarthenshire border. He met last week with the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. That gives you an indication of how seriously the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are taking the regrowth of small and medium businesses in Wales. Only 18 people round the table, including a proper representative from Wales, and on a sheet of conclusions which were reached, they recognise that actually the employment laws created by the last government form a barrier to SME recruitment, although the value of interns is good, but employment law discourages this opportunity to learn. Banks are not a useful source of advice. That real-world experience and cannot make decisions at local level. And finally, people and skills are a crucial part of expansion, and the emphasis given to value of KTP's R&D tax credits have been restricted by overzealous HMRC people. They recognise that there were a number of measures, often passed with the best of intentions by the last government, which frustrated private sector growth. This was discussed at the highest level last week, involving business, small and medium business people from Wales. That should be a reflection that the comprehensive spending review is a realistic, even at times painful pill that we have to swallow, and I have every confidence it will deliver the proper balanced economy that my honourable friend from Aberconwy referred to in his very excellent speech.